So, on today's episode, I'm going to be teaching you how to lose your friends for just $12. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, I'm not sure. Why are you watching this episode? Why do you want to lose your friends for $12? You tell me. Let me know in the comments below. But yeah, sometimes it's fun to come up with deck ideas that are, well, incredibly obnoxious / annoying / so obnoxious that you end up losing your friends. Now, obviously, disclaimer, warning, please do not actually play this deck without asking your playgroup or, people at your LGS or your friends first if it's okay to play, because, yeah, even though this deck is only $12, it is incredibly obnoxious and brutal, and it breaks one of the major commander taboos. Now, before we jump to the cards, I just want to say every single card in this deck is, of course, very budget-friendly. I mean, I believe every card in the deck is pretty much under 50 cents or so because, yeah, it's a $12 deck. And if you are interested in checking out the deck list, it is in the description below. But again, please ask your playgroup ahead of time before deciding to buy and use this deck. And of course, in this episode, I'm going to be breaking things down into different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. So with all that said, let's jump into it. Now, when selecting the commander for this brutal deck, I wanted to pick one that is a bit unassuming, so I went with Svella Ice Shaper, which works perfectly with what we're trying to do. Svella is a 2/4 Troll Warrior, which is kind of funny that it is a troll because it's a very trolly deck that costs 1 red-green. It has pay 3, tap, create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manalith with tap, add 1 mana of any color. And by paying 6 red-green, we tap to look at the top 4 cards of our library. We can cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost, but the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, although it is fun to spin the wheel and see what we get at the top of our library to cast something for free, and we can do that when we need to, what we really want to do with this commander is to make an absurd amount of mana rocks. Because with what we're going to be doing, it's going to be very advantageous for us to have a ton of mana rocks in play. So we're going to utilize this commander to flood the board with Icy Manaliths, and of course there are other ways for us to ramp with this deck as well. Let's go through those quickly before we talk about the game plan. And one of those ways actually involves untapping a snow permanent, which can either be our commander, which is a snow creature, or again with those Icy Manaliths, which is a snow permanent. And Rhyme Tender is that creature that can do that, tap, untap another target snow permanent. So with this, we can make multiple Icy Manaliths on the same turn, which is massive to help us not only ramp, but also to help us, well, get ahead of our opponents in the sector of mana that matters, and we'll talk about why here in a bit. Regardless, of course, we've got other mana rocks like Roll Signet, Fire Diamond, and Moss Diamond, each which cost 2 and can help tap for essentially 1. Roll Signet has pay 1 tap and it adds each of our colors. Fire Diamond can tap for a red, and Moss Diamond can tap for a green, though they each enter the battlefield tapped. Regardless, these are efficient mana rocks that we can get down early before we get our commander out. Speaking of which, there's Mind Stone, which we can also get down on turn 2. We can tap for a color, so we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice it to draw a card. And then we essentially have bigger versions of Mind Stone with Hedron Archive and Dreamstone Hedron. Hedron Archive is essentially Mind Stone with everything being 2, and Dreamstone Hedron is the same, but at 3. Regardless, again, utilizing ramp sources that are mana rocks in a green deck is a bit counterintuitive and something that you usually don't do, but again, with our game plan, you'll understand why. Now, finally, we're also going to be utilizing Galvanoth, which says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may cast without paying its mana cost. So while this doesn't ramp us, it does help us cast things off the top of our library for free, which can be absolutely massive. And yeah, we've got a ton of instant sorceries in this deck, and not having to actually utilize mana for them is huge. Because, well, at a certain point outside of our mana rocks, we might not have all that mana to use. And the reason why, well, comes up with our next tactic. Because this is, of course, a land destruction deck, and my goodness, are there a lot of cheap, fantastic land destruction cards out there. Again, disclaimer, that's why I mentioned at the beginning, we are breaking a major commander taboo. Blowing up lands is not something that many playgroups out there are okay with. So unless your playgroup is okay with land destruction, do not play this deck, and especially don't play these cards in the deck like Tremble, Aki Blizzard Herder, and Heirloom Shaman. Tremble is a 2-mana spell that says each player sacrifices a land. And then Aki Blizzard Herder and Heirloom Shaman are essentially creatures that do the exact same thing when they die. When they die, each player sacrifices a land. These are all low to the ground cards that get rid of 3 of our opponent's lands, 1 of each, and actually 1 of ours as well. But again, we are not going to be dependent on lands for our ramp, for our mana sources. So by diminishing our opponent's resources and creating a steady supply of icy manaless, we can stay ahead of our opponents. Now, of course, we've got other ways to destroy multiple lands that actually don't affect us, like Rain of Salt, Terraston, and Orcish Settlers. Rain of Salt, which is a very aptly named card for this deck, simply says destroy 2 target lands. Terraston says when it enters the battlefield, you can destroy it to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put graveyard this way, its controller gets a 3/3 green elfin creature token. And then Orcish Settlers has pay XX and a red, tap, sacrifice Orcish Settlers, destroy X target lands. So these can really set back 1 or multiple players. Speaking of which, there's Ember Swallower, which has, when it becomes monstrous, each player sacrifices 3 lands. And then Tectonic Hellion has, when it attacks, each player who controls the most lands sacrifices 2 lands. And then yet another creature that can help us out, but in a different way, is Wort the Raid Mother. When it enters the battlefield, we get 2 1/1s that are both red and green, and it says each red or green instant or sorcery spell you cast has Conspire. So essentially, when we cast a spell, we can tap 2 untapped creatures that share a color with it, and then copy that spell. Which, when it comes to land destruction spells, obviously makes them twice as deadly. Now, one that won't get twice as deadly if we copy it, but one that is deadly to certain players, is Tsunami, which is going to destroy all islands. So that mono blue player at the table is gonna be out of luck. And then how about Bend or Break, which makes each player separate all their lands into 2 different piles, and then one of those piles gets sacrificed. And speaking of sacrificing, there's Thoughts of Ruin, which says each player sacrifice a land for each card in your hand. So this can be an especially brutal card, especially early in the game. But of course, we're nowhere near done with mass removing lands just yet, so let's talk about Wildfire, Destructive Force, and Impending Disaster. Wildfire makes everyone sacrifice 4 lands, and it deals 4 damage to each creature, whereas Destructive Force does the same, but with 5. And speaking of counting, Impending Disaster says, during your upkeep, if there are 7 or more lands in play, sacrifice Impending Disaster and destroy all lands. Yeah, this does have to get to our upkeep, but it is a 2-mana enchantment, which in a game of Commander is essentially guaranteed to get rid of every single land on the board. Now, as good as every one of these cards are, there's one in my opinion that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck. And the Golden Pig of this deck, the #1 card out of our 9, is Boom or Bust. Well, okay, I probably should say Bust, but let's go through Boom first. Boom is a sorcery that costs 1 and a red, to destroy target land you control, target land you don't control. So it's nice to have that option, but most of the time we want to cast Bust, which says destroy all lands. So at sorcery speed for 6 mana, we get rid of every single land on the board. And again, if we've been planning ahead and stockpiling our mana rocks like our icy manaliths, we're going to be fine, but everyone, including ourselves, is going to lose out on every single one of our lands and be set back a ton. And of course, the advantage is going to shift from having land power to mana rock power, and we are going to be fine with that. So yeah, Bust is a very simple spell, but one that is incredibly impactful in this deck, and that's what makes it the Golden Pig. But of course, we are nowhere near done with land destruction just yet, and we have plenty of targeted land destruction with cards like Stone Rain, Molten Rain, and Pillage, which can each destroy target land. Each of these are just 3 mana, and Molten Rain on top of that is going to punish that player if that land was non-basic by pinging them for 2, and Pillage also has the option, instead of taking out an artifact, and on top of that, that land or artifact can't be regenerated. But regardless, most of the time, we're going to be taking out lands. Also at 3 mana, we've got Winter's Grasp, which is again just a very simple spell, destroy target land. Next up, Raise is just 1 mana. It's going to make us sacrifice 1 land to destroy any land, but that's going to be worth it for us in a ton of situations. Speaking of worth it, Plunder has to spend 4/4, 1 in a red, so we have to pay 2 mana to get rid of an artifact or a land, as long as we're patient enough to actually wait for this card to be cast once all of its time counters are removed. Next up, though, at 4 mana, we've got a card like Seismic Spike, which can destroy land and give us red. Smashing Success can destroy an artifact or a land, and if an artifact is destroyed this way, we get a treasure token. And Roiling Terrain can really punish a player. It says destroy target land, then Roiling Terrain deals damage to that land's control equal to the number of land cards in that player's graveyard. So that can be a ton of damage if they've been losing out on a lot of lands. Next up, we've got some 4 mana destroy land spells that we can actually get back for some additional value with Earth Rift, Flowstone Flood, and Icefall. Earth Rift has flashback, Flowstone Flood has buyback for paying 3 life and discarding a card at random, and Icefall says recover for red. Basically, that means that if a creature is put in our grave from play, we can pay red. If we do, it goes back from our graveyard to our hand. otherwise it gets exiled. Regardless, we've got the potential to destroy multiple lands, or, when it comes to Icefall, artifacts with these. Next up, we've got Lay Waste, which can destroy a land, or we can cycle it for 2. Violent Impact, which is essentially the exact same thing, but we also have the option to destroy an artifact, and Rubble Reading, which says destroy target land, scry 2. And while scrying isn't card advantage, it's a nice initial card selection for us. Which, of course, works with our commander's second ability if we really want to utilize that. Moving on, though, we've got some very simple spells. For 4 mana, we can destroy an artifact or a land with Sunder from Within, Demolish, and Wreak Havoc, which also can't be countered by spells or abilities, which is just a nice little addition. And speaking of flexible, next up we've got Desecration Plague, Aftershock, and Creeping Mold. Desecration Plague can destroy an enchantment or a land, Aftershock can destroy an artifact, creature, or land, it deals 3 damage to us, and Creeping Mold can destroy either an artifact, enchantment, or a land. Which might sound familiar when you look at Reclaiming Vines, which does the exact same thing for the exact same cost, or Acidic Slime, which does the exact same thing but on an ETB with a 2/2 Death Toucher, and it costs 1 more. But then finally we've got Waking the Trolls, which is a saga that has destroy target land with its first lore counter, its second says put target land card from a graveyard on the battlefield under your control, and its third says choose target opponent if they control fewer lands than you, create a number of 4/4 green troll warrior creature tokens that trample equal to the difference. So this is definitely a way that you can take your opponents out with a troll army, though your opponents probably are just going to actually quit ahead of time, because you destroyed all their lands and they can't do anything and they're just sitting there. But now let's talk about cards like Regrowth, Dryad's Revival, and Timeless Witness, which are incredible in this deck. Regrowth says return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and basically all these do the exact same thing. Dryad's Revival can be flashback to do the same, and Timeless Witness is a creature that has eternalized and it can do the same. Regrowth type effects like these are incredible with our land destruction spells, especially our mass land destruction spells. I mean, just think about getting bust back again and again and again. Good luck to your opponents ever trying to rebuild. So, of course, we're also going to be running cards like Ardent Elementalist, Once in Future, and Restock. Ardent Elementalist has when it enters the battlefield, return target instant sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Once in Future can bring us back 2 cards, 1 to our hand and 1 on top of our library, or both to our hand if we use 3 green mana to cast the spell, which we definitely can do. And speaking of 2 cards, there's Restock, which can bring us back 2 cards from our graveyard to our hand and it gets exiled. So yeah, what's worse than 1 mass land destruction spell for our opponents? How about 2 mass land destruction spells back? And what's really bad for them is a card like the Mending of Dominaria, which has mill 2 cards and return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand for its first and second lore counters, and its third one says return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, then shuffle your graveyard into your library. So with a mass land destruction spell utilized that gets rid of our lands too, well, we can utilize this to actually get all of our lands back to get way ahead of our opponents. And of course, this can actually get us some creatures back for some additional card advantage and more land destruction with those creatures that do so. And speaking of card advantage, we've got cards like Throw Possibility and Tormenting Voice, which make us discard 1 to draw 2, and Season's Woes, which does the exact same thing, but we also get a treasure token. So it's a nice additional benefit for that 1 extra mana investment. Moving on, we've got Cathartic Reunion, which makes us discard 2 to draw 3, and Harmonize, which just lets us draw 3. And speaking of 3, there's Ignite the Future, which makes us exile the top 3 cards of our library. Until the end of our next turn, we can play those cards. If this spell is cast from a graveyard, we can play those cards out, paying their mana costs instead. So this can be a lot of great temporary card advantage, and if we flash it back, it can do some absolutely massive things. And speaking of massive, there's Commune with Lava, which is an X spell. It's going to have us exile the top X cards of our library. Until the end of our next turn, we can play those cards. But a repeatable source of temporary card advantage comes with Outpost Siege, which says, well, if you choose cons, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your turn, you may play that card. So this can provide us a lot of value throughout the game. Now, really quick, I do want to highlight some lands that can help us out as well with our strategy with Not-Vold Slumberbound and Memorial of War. Each of these essentially enters the battlefield tapped, can temporary red, and we can sacrifice them to destroy target land. So even our lands can destroy lands, which is just lovely. Well, for us. Anyways, next up we've got Drownyard Temple, Darksteel Citadel, and Slagwoods Bridge. Drownyard Temple has pay 3, return Drownyard Temple from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And again, there are going to be plenty of times where we're actually sacrificing or destroying our own lands, so being able to get 1 back can be huge. Or again, indestructible lands like Darksteel Citadel, which can tap for a colorless, or Slagwoods Bridge, which enters battlefield tapped or can tap for either one of our colors. So when we go to cast something like Boom, well, we can still keep some lands in play. But now that we've gone through every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. And like I said at the beginning of this episode and in the title and the thumbnail, well, this is a $12 deck. Okay, technically $11.89 is the estimated cost. And actually, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards because, of course, those cards need a home too. Though, do keep in mind this estimated cost does not include the cost of basic lands, but you can usually get basic lands for very cheap. And also keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. That being said, again, please, before you go to buy this deck, please check with your playgroup ahead of time to make sure that this is the kind of deck that is okay with them. Because if not, you truly might lose your friends. Which, okay, I guess that is the title of the episode, but still, the episode's just for fun. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.